Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, winers, diners and oil refiners, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel where we discuss books and little else. And it is, I believe, Saturday the 6th of April, and that of course can only mean one thing. Arch rivals Hull KR versus Hull FC play in a matter of a few hours, and so I thought amidst the morning flurry I would, as I say, catch 30 minutes to speak to you about Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. But you know, here in the People's Republic of Kingston upon Hull, you know, everybody, spectators await the referee's whistle, tempers await their flaring, and heroes await their beatification. It is on everybody's lips, whether you are a laundrette, whether you are a blower of leaves, whether you are a reeler in of fish, whether you are a stopper of traffic for the travel of young children, whatever role you have in society, whatever pleasures you take, you cannot simply ignore Hull Kingston Rovers versus Hull FC, a rugby match taking place at 1400 hours GMT on BBC One. So if any of you are curious as to what it is that entertains Joseph when he is not before texts, then you can tune in on the BBC if you're a UK tax-paying national at 1400 GMT, as I say, 2 p.m. this afternoon. And I was just making one of my rare coffees this morning, and I was remarking on how very stubborn, bureaucratically stubborn, the big hand is when we are awaiting a big event. When we are, you know, with great family members, when we're with friends, when we are perhaps dancing scantily clad in lily fields with lovers, how quickly and efficiently and how willing that big hand is to move, how quickly time doth gallop when we're in great company. And yet, when a big event is on the horizon, time seems to stand still. It is, as I say, bureaucratically stubborn. But obviously that is very much on my mind. So you will, I think, excuse inattention or perhaps blatant inability throughout this video, because I have bigger things on my mind than Charles Dickens. But anyway, what else is going on in the world? I am learning the positions of very many countries in the world map at the moment, doing it very successfully in a rather autistic way. I'm not sure why that is. But I feel the need to know where Nepal is placed, and where Kuwait is placed, and where the Philippines is placed, and where Egypt is placed, and where North Macedonia is placed. I'm learning all of those areas, and I can now do everything but Africa and South America. So that's coming along nicely day by day, and I shall soon be fully geographically endowed. And of course, following the imposition of import tariffs by the cretinous Supreme Leader of the United States, we have found that throughout all of the chatter and throughout all of the nonsense peddling, there are blue parties and there are red parties, but it is the colour green which seems to rule the roost in the political space. You can be ever so conservative, you can be ever so popular, ever so magnificent in office, and yet if the economy tanks whilst you have the reins in your hands, then you can guarantee that you will see a diminishment in your support. So thankfully, it is now only the hardiest of Trump supporters who are looking to defend the economic policies, and who knows what that will beckon, who knows what that will betoken, who knows what that will precipitate. But thankfully, Donald Trump is finally unpopular in his own country. But I have, as I say, I've got a book to discuss with you today. We have Charles Dickens' Great Expectations in this finely clad Penguin English Library edition. I think this format will be a mystery, or at least a sort of a foreign quiddity to many of you Americans watching. I think these are only available in the UK and only get to you via sort of alternative routes. So I think every classic worthy of modern scrutiny has now had one of these front covers. I have in this particular skin, in this particular edition, I have Great Expectations, Richard Marsh's The Beetle, a similar novel, I'm sure we'll agree, and I have, what else do I have? I have oh goodness me, what's it called? The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Stevenson, and I think that might be it. Maybe a sort of a sectet or an octet of Sherlock Holmes stories. But I like these not because I am particularly attractive to the front covers. I find they are ruefully reductive, but I like the font. Look at this font. There is the font, rather sharp, rather jagged, and sort of boldly distinct in this subjective modern world. I really do like the font, and I think it might even aid my reading. Who knows? But this was written and serialised to the public in the year 1860 to 1861. Strange that I thought this was part of not Dickens's juvenilia, but part of his earlier work. I thought this came in tandem with the Pickwick Papers and Oliver Twist and Nicholas Nickleby, the early stuff, and yet upon inspecting his bibliography we find that this was written when to write a novel for Charles Dickens was as easy for him as it is for us to lace our boots, and so we must admit that we are dealing with somebody who at least purports at this stage in his life to be a professional, to be a novelizer, a novelizer most high and grand, and yet I'm not so sure. But I have enjoyed this. I must say that I have certainly enjoyed this. I usually find myself reading Dickens rolling my eyes most of the time, and attacking him with my penciled annotations, and yet I must say that I have enjoyed this much more than I was expecting. So what does it cover? It covers Philip Pirrip, who of course is who is given the sobriquet of Pip by those around him, or at least by himself, and he is, when young, a sallow, sort of slightly unadventurous, strangely contemplative young boy, and of course this is a Bildungsroman that follows him through his life. He grows up in, I think, what can only be described or defined as the marshlands of Kent, a couple of dozen miles from the thriving metropolis of London, the industrialised metropolis of London, and he is as per usual, he is motherless, he is fatherless, and has only one surviving sibling who does not waste 15 minutes upon his entering the house to whip him into something silly. Mrs. Joe Gardry, as she is called, her forename is going to escape me, but his brother-in-law, Mr. Joe Gardry, is a blacksmith, and he spends his time being reared by them, and his sister is an unforgivable matriarch towards him. She has a poker which goes by the name of Tickler, and as I say, she never demurs from striking him across the face with it. But one night, when Pip is sort of wandering about the marshes, he comes into contact with a convict who has iron shackled to his leg and a little file/whittle, and he demands of Pip sort of not a king's ransom, but a prince's ransom of food and a few materials to aid in his escape or survival, because we presume that he was in police custody and has now fled. And Pip joyfully and assiduously gathers. It doesn't joyfully quite, but assiduously gathers those bits and bobs, that sustenance for him, hands it over, and he is not thankful in the moment, but we learn later on in this novel that he is rapturously thankful for what Pip has done for him, and then Pip is quite out of the blue invited to Satis House, which is the property of a Miss Havisham, who is scary and austere and wrinkly and immovable, it would seem, and she was, again, we learn later in the novel, of course, this video will be bespeckled with very many spoilers, so if indeed you plan on reading Great Expectations and do not want to know the ins and outs, then now would be a decent time to bid me adieu. But we find out that that Miss Havisham was jilted on her wedding day, and essentially sits with the moulding cake, sort of day after day, barely moving, and only wants to do sort of trips around a sort of velodrome with Pip. She only wants to be walked by him around a room. There is a small girl in her charge by the name of Estella, who is similarly austere, but has the advantages of youth and beauty, and so Pip takes a shining to her, and because he cannot have her, because he is, as George Eliot would have said, the sole sovereign thrown from view or whatever, or thrown from reach, Pip takes a particular shining to her. He has a fight with a man who will later become one of his greatest friends, Herbert Pocket. He has a fight with a blanched and pale chap who takes his punishment well, and then finds that his sister gets what's coming to her. Again, later on, we learn that a piggish, porcine chap by the name of Orlick has gone in there and beaten her silly. But we find a gentleman by the name of Mr. Jaggers comes into contact with Pip and many other people at the Jolly Three Bargemen, which is the local boozer, and he is given great expectations. For the first 100 pages, we are wondering whether this is going to be some artful play on the title Great Expectations. We wonder if it's a misnomer, but indeed Great Expectations are hoisted upon young Pip's shoulders. And so he goes off to London. The patron or patroness, the patron in question, is veiled from view and cannot really even be asked about. And Jaggers makes a great deal of the veiled nature of the patron, and he sort of dots about London at different places, never acquires a profession, but Mr. Jaggers is a particularly alluring character. He seems to have everybody under the thumb, and Dickens points out many times that he seems to have deadly information on everyone, which, if he were to disclose, would lead to their imprisonment. And Pip isn't quite as enamoured or ensorcelled, to coin a lovely word, it isn't quite as ensorcelled by London as he thought he would be, but is nonetheless, quite happy in his quarters. He then goes to the Pockets household, who is a sort of a friend of Mr. Jaggers, and that then sort of mires the narrative a little bit. Dickens becomes, I think, rather too big for his boots at certain times, especially when he's engaging in Ire dialect and when he is really just knocking on the foreheads of the poor. But Pip sort of dallies about, and the convict who was who obviously purpled the first maybe 20 or 30 pages of the narrative, comes to loom ever larger at the end, and that's probably all the that's all of the synopsis I want to give you. This book, unfortunately, is held afloat by 2 or 3 inexplicable Deus Ex Machinae. Not quite sure what the plural is for Deus Ex Machina, but I'm going to go with Machinae. It's held together by 2 or 3 ridiculous seemings together by Dickens, and unfortunately, I think the realism therefore goes under the surface, or goes rather in the bin, in the refuse sack. But yeah, enjoyable. I got along with most of the narrative voice. An awful lot of the time, Dickens is cackling at his desk, and I think it's a little bit too self-aware, maybe, and a little bit too writerly, which is saying a lot, considering for myself, considering that I do indeed like a writer who, wows us with his stylistic pyrotechnics. But even for me, sometimes this went overboard. But there was, I think, the accusation may be levelled at Dickens a few times when I've been discussing him with people, with like-minded littérateurs, is that he is a little bit not easy, but a little bit I don't know. He doesn't take himself as seriously as other writers. It seems that George Eliot and other writers of the period, Charlotte Bronte and Anthony Trollope, they were all trying to go to a different novelised place, whereas Dickens was sort of happy on the theatrical stage, doing easier things, and that's what I've taken from here. But I do have very many sections to read out to you, and hopefully I can illumine your minds with the quotations better or brighter than I have illumined your minds with my, I think we can admit, rather shoddy explanations of the book. But yeah, let us get into this. This is a Pip's initial thoughts about his time there and about his time in again what I take to be Kent, in his opening village, and I think I've written in the margin, what a thought for a young soul to enclose, because he is quite a depressed chap, because he views no way out, and thinks that he will be forever forever under the thumb of some capitalist or whatever. Joe made the fire, that's his brother-in-law. Joe made the fire and swept the hearth, and then we went to the door to listen for the chase cart. It was a dry, cold night, and the wind blew keenly, and the frost was white and hard. A man would die tonight of lying out on the marshes, I thought, and then I looked at the stars and considered how awful it would be for a man to turn his face up to them as he froze to death and see no help or pity in all the glittering multitude. Now, for an 8 or 9-year-old boy to be thinking in such a way is quite frightening, I'm sure we'll agree. But that has reminded me that Dickens does a great job of pleasing both the elbow-patched and indeed the custard-stained, if you know what I mean. He pleases the academic with some fine writing, and yet also for the slovenly, slatternly student who has never read so much as a greeting card since they were 14 or 15, who decries the complexity of most canonical literature. There is something in there for them. There is a followability. There is a readability to much of the prose, and I can't help but think, like in the case with maybe George Orwell and Salman Rushdie, that their easiness, and indeed Sally Rooney, their easiness, or their ease, or the ease of comprehension, is often confused with gravitas and brilliance. I can't help but think that is the case. But one thing that I didn't mention before is that Pip thinks that his Great Expectations and all of the marvellous stipends which are thrown at him, all of the notes that are thrown at him, will of course make him happier, only to find that he believes himself to have been perhaps a little happier if he had been, left at the blacksmith's with Joe. Next we have the distinctiveness of high living scores itself indelibly on Pip's young mind, and we're talking about it being a particularly memorable day for him. I thought how Joe and my sister were then sitting in the kitchen, and how I had come up to bed from the kitchen, and how Miss Havisham and Estella never sat in a kitchen, but were far above the level of such common doings. You notice how he used kitchen 3 times there, and really should have elegantly varied that. I fell asleep recalling what I used to do when I was at Miss Havisham's, as though I had been there weeks or months instead of hours, and as though it were quite an old subject of remembrance instead of one that had arisen only that day. That was a memorable day to me, for it made great changes in me. But it is the same with any life. Imagine one selected day struck out of it, and think how different its course would have been. Pause, you who read this, and think for a moment of the long chain of iron or gold, of thorns or flowers, that would never have bound you, but for the formation of the first link on one memorable day. Now that's a good example of Dickens's I think quite lazy style, but then also exquisite style simultaneously. That was gripping, but it was also slightly appalling, was it not, with the repetition of a certain few words. So yeah, I must recommend it, of course. If you're going to be considered well read or widely read, then perhaps half a dozen Charles Dickens books certainly have to be consumed. But I wondered what Dickens was trying... well, I thought it was actually tremendously obvious what Dickens was trying to do, and I thought for a man of such intelligence, surely there must be some undertones which I am missing, but there seemed not to be. And you can see why I was appalled again in the first maybe 10 or 15 pages, because Joseph Edward Spivey, Esquire of 2021, could be seen with his blasphemous pen notes at the bottom there as well, because this was the copy I bought when it was studied in when I studied it in my first year of university. So, and again, as I say, was absolutely disgusted by the comments that I had made those years ago. But that just about, I think, covers us for today. I'm glad that I've been able to get a video out for you. Wasn't sure that my mind would be in a decent state, given that we are all here frenzied in this small city of ours, as our worst enemies are about to brawl with us. A few differences between Hull Kingston Rovers and Hull KR. We usually wash our hands before eating. They do not. We have academic qualifications. They do not. We are tax-paying and law-abiding citizens. They are not. So you can see that there are one or two almost biological differences between us. I am not usually a furtherer of bigotry, but they were born and indeed continue to live quite different to us. So we will hopefully beat them. Every single rational strategist, of course, has put us maybe 10 or 12 points ahead of them, but rugby league is a game of momentum, and if indeed you slip up in the first 10 or 15 minutes, if you fail to corner the opposition, then many bookmakers' odds can be sent flying and windmilling through the hatch. So I'm probably going to stop jabbering and Lord knows what else. I'm probably going to peruse YouTube, maybe start reading a small few essays on cycling, and then commit to the sporting event. So thank you ever so much for clinging on. If indeed you have managed to sustain the ride of this roller coaster, I will be back perhaps early next week, hopefully with a triumphal grin besmattering my face, and I will see you all soon. So yes, thank you ever so much for watching BookTube, and I bid you the fondest of earthly farewells.